Hey, welcome to this awesome geeked out conversation about a really important aspect of music theory. It's cool to see everyone on, and as always, if you're part of the replay crew, let us know where you're coming from as well. We're going to be geeking out on something really important, and that is the chord names in the circle of fifths. Now, I have a chord map here that I use quite a bit in different videos here, and I haven't really dived into the names. We've talked about in other live streams the different names that are used in music in different contexts, whether it's the sharp names, flat names, double sharps, double flats, natural names, all of that. But here we're going to focus specifically on these labels in the circle of fifths to label different chords. And just to kind of get our bearings here, let's jump right in to the structure of this circle of fifths. So the chord map is this inner ring is all of the major chords in a circle of fifths sequence. The circle of fifths is visually depicted by the color wheel. Since all keys in music overlap, all colors in the color wheel bleed seamlessly into each other. So it's not only analogous, but just a visual representation of what the underlying patterns of music are. And then likewise, in this middle ring, we have minor chords that are shown by the letter name of the chord along with the lowercase m. So C minor, G minor, D minor, A minor, and so on. And this middle ring too is a circle of fifths sequence or a color wheel. And then in this outer ring, we have diminished chords. So C diminished, this little O means that it's diminished. This O means that it's G diminished, D diminished, A diminished, and so on. So this outer ring is also a series of fifths or chords that are spaced at fifths. But what does that mean? We're going to get into that. And we're also going to look at why, for example, let me rotate this so you can see it from this orientation. Why, for example, we have like a larger B and then its enharmonic name is C flat. Why C flat is a little bit smaller. E or a small F flat, a big C sharp minor, a small D flat minor, and so on. What was the thinking behind these naming conventions? Why is it structured that way? And so we're going to get into the circle of fifths. So to start, this is really fundamental, but worth just kind of retracing these steps, that in music we have 12 notes, which are the chromatic scale. And this sequence of notes is what we actually use to play instruments. So like on a keyboard, it's all of the notes in a chromatic sequence, rising or falling in a given octave and then repeating through different octaves. And the way that these notes, how we arrive at these notes, is that the chromatic scale is just a rearrangement of the circle of fifths. And so the circle of fifths is just taking every other note and rotating those 180 degrees so that you get this formation of harmonically related notes in this sequence, which is the circle of fifths. Like I say, it's analogous to and actually identical with the color wheel. So the circle of fifths is a really important pattern in music. Say this, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, but it is often relegated to the footnotes, the circle of fifths, when really it should be the preface of everything in music because it informs so much. So we could look, and we often do look at notes just as these colored shapes, which highlight the relationships and intervals between the notes. Music is all about the intervals, and so it's important to see these patterns in this way. But another way to kind of picture it, to get our bearings, is to plot these notes on the black and white topography or pattern of the keyboard. So here we have the chromatic scale circle, or CSC, versus the circle of fifths, COF, right? And it's what we just looked at. It's just a rearrangement of the same pattern. The chromatic scale looks like this scrambled color wheel, because it is, in essence. And then we have the circle of fifths, which is this color wheel. It's just this harmonic sequence. So notice here we have this black and white pattern of 2 black keys and then 3 black keys. And if we were to look at the keyboard, it's the same thing. We have C and then 2 black keys in this grouping of 3 white keys. And then we have these 4 white keys that surround these 3 black keys. That is, in essence, what we're looking at here in this chromatic scale. Is just a chromatic scale circle because we're looping it into pitch space. So we're disregarding octaves and just focusing on the 12 fundamental notes and how it forms this repeating pattern. Okay. So that's the familiar pattern of the chromatic scale. Now, what's interesting about this is if you just kind of like look past the colors and focus only on the black and white pattern, that pattern is more familiar because it's what the keyboard actually looks like, what we're familiar with the black and white arrangement of notes on the keyboard. But if you focus on the colors here, it's the color wheel. So it's a more familiar pattern. So the black and white topography over here of the chromatic scale is familiar. The color wheel of the circle of fifths is familiar. But what's interesting is if we, if these were like stickers and we placed each of these colored shapes onto the keyboard, and then we do that rotation of taking every other note and rotating them 180 degrees to get the circle of fifths, to get this harmonic sequence of the color wheel, since the stickers are stuck to the keys and we rotate the colors, the keys also rotate, and we get this interesting, very interesting formation of black and white keys where all of the black keys on the keyboard now are adjacent. They become neighbors in the circle of fifths, and all of the white keys become neighbors in the circle of fifths. In other videos, we've talked about how this is like Pangea, how the circle of fifths is kind of like the ancient connection between consonants before the tectonic plates spread the consonants out and became what we know of as the chromatic scale, to use that analogy. But using the black and white keyboard pattern, it's interesting to see that this Pangea, or this original formation, is showing that all of the white keys are neighbors and all of the black keys are neighbors. So that's kind of interesting, and we're going to use this black and white to highlight some interesting patterns that are going on in the chord map, in the circle of fifths. Now, ultimately, the black and white, you can kind of like let them go because they're kind of like training wheels on our mental 10-speed bike. So at some point, you don't really need to rely on the black and white to keep your bearings and make sense of these patterns. But it is interesting to see what's going on because there is a significance to the black and white. So let's go back to this diagram. And let's say that we're going to take this color wheel, or this ring of major chords, this relationship between black and white keys, and let's form 3 concentric rings. Okay, so this kind of looks like the chord map, but it's a little bit different in that all of the notes that have a red root, or C as the root note, are aligned. All of the notes with red, orange, or D or G, pardon me, are aligned. D major in the inner ring, D minor in the middle ring, and D diminished in the outer ring, and so on. So all around the circle, we have this interesting relationship or alignment, I should say, between the major, minor, and diminished chords radiating out in these concentric rings. Now, we're not going to keep it like this. This is eventually going to get realigned to get at the circle of fifths, the useful, practical version of the circle of fifths to play chord progressions. But just to kind of get our bearings, we're starting with these 3 concentric rings with all of the root notes aligned. And as a result, all of the white and black keys are aligned as well. Every root note that has a sharp or a flat in it is in this black key region. And then all of the notes, or all of the chords that have a natural name for its root, meaning it doesn't have any sharps or flats, they're over here. Okay, so now we're going to take this pattern and we're going to align or rotate each concentric ring into the chord map pattern. So now we have, this is in essence what, let's put C at the top. This is in essence what this is, but with the black and white showing kind of like the underlying accidentals, or meaning sharps and flats behind the scenes. They're kind of like there, but we don't ultimately care when it comes to progressing with chord progressions, but knowing that these are accidentals or sharps is interesting. And what we do is it's almost like taking, if you were to crack a safe, like in those heist movies where they go into the bank and they're like listening to the tumblers and they're unlocking it. That's in essence what we just did, where we rotated the concentric rings so they went and locked into place and highlight really interesting relationships. And with the chord map, we've talked about these relationships to varying degrees. But what's really interesting is if you take this inner ring, which is all of the black keys as a group right here, and all of the white keys there, and then you rotate it so that now C starts right here. We have all of these white keys, and it's this kind of like staggered offset relationship. So now all of these white keys, and you can see it, I'm just highlighting, tracing the lines, but it forms this really interesting pattern. Now, what's the point of this? Is this just for the GWiz file, or is there kind of a significance here that we can make use of and get our bearings and really solidify our understanding of the chord map pattern? The answer is yes to the latter, that this actually is insightful in some really cool ways. So we'll come back to this, but I want to show how another way that we can depict the different accidentals or sharps and flats in the circle of fifths is using this pattern, which is, again, taking the keys of the keyboard, but instead of just wrapping it within a single octave from C to, just 12 notes, now we're cycling through all keys. So all 12 keys. And so we have, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And that's, the key of C, or we have the key of G. So starting on G, from G to G, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And then starting on D, we have that, and so on. So we have this daisy chain pattern of overlapping keys. Now, what's interesting is when we show it like this, it's kind of cool. So in the key of C, so let's zoom in on this. That is, we have C to C. So no accidentals. As on the keyboard, you can see that when you play the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, none of these black keys were played. But once we get into the key of G, so we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, there's that one sharp. And these patterns are just formed by the whole steps and half steps that make major scale. But, I'm not showing that diagram. But in G, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. That's the G major scale. So on a keyboard, when you play G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, we get that one F sharp. Now, it's just, if you look at the squares and circles or the whole steps and half steps, that's really what matters. That's the actual underlying pattern. But on a keyboard, it is interesting to see that, yes, there is that one sharp, the F sharp. And if we were to start on D and play the same pattern of whole steps and half steps, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, we get two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, which I'm still not jumping back between the different cameras here, but this is D major, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. And we have D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So F sharp and C sharp are the two sharps that show up there, and so on. We could keep going around the circle, but you get the idea. Progressively, as we go in either direction, in a clockwise circle of fifths direction, we get increasingly more sharps. And in a circle of fourths or counterclockwise direction, we get an increasing number of flats. So more sharps going to the right and more flats going to the left. That is where the key signatures of the traditional circle of fifths is shown. And I'm showing it on old parchment like this because it really should be relegated as a dusty old museum piece than as any practical tool that would be useful today. But that's where these sharps come from. The key of C had no accidentals, no black keys. The key of G had an F sharp in that keyboard. diagram we just looked at, D has two sharps, F sharp and C sharp, and so on. And learning music notation, you have to like know that this is the F line. So this is an F sharp, this is an F and a C. There's a lot of like memorization that you have to go through to even get your bearings to interpret this dusty old diagram. But that's what this diagram is how it's formed. It's what it's referring to. And like I say, going in a counterclockwise direction, you have progressive flats as well. So if you think of the circle of fifths like this, you're severely limiting yourself. If you think of it like this, it's at least more tangible. It's more concrete and practical. You can actually play these patterns on an instrument and start to see the significance of these patterns. But even better than all of that is the chord map to see, oh, okay, so that is in essence what this is showing as well, is this increasing number of sharps to the right and increasing number of flats to the left or counterclockwise. So what does that mean? Well, let's look at the chord map, starting with C, okay? So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. That's the pattern. It kind of forms this star formation. And none of those have a sharp or a flat. So in the key of C, in this grouping, there are no accidentals. It's kind of like that archaic old circle of fifths key signature with no sharps or flats, but in a layout that actually guides us in playing chord progressions rather than just listing a seemingly useless factoid of whether the key has sharps or flats. Here we can actually use this information, and if we look at this diagram and then group, let me make a thicker line if I can. There we go. Thicker line. So if we just group the chords in C, notice that it's all white keys. There's no sharps or flats. So this key of C matches what we see in the other representations of the circle of fifths. Now, if we rotate over, let's do it over here first. If we rotate over to the key of G, so now we're, actually I'm going to rotate the numerals too. We rotate to the key of G, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. So there is one F sharp in this key. Now, if we look at this pattern in the in this format with the black and white, it does stand out a little more. So I'm doing the grouping around those keys or around those chords. We have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp because it's a black key back to G. So you can see that that is why the key of G, why F sharp is positioned where it is, because it is the sharp in the key of G. Likewise, if we go to the chord map and we rotate over to the key of D, so now D is 1, D, E, F sharp minor, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So now we have a black key or an accidental, a sharp, and a sharp. Just like in the traditional circle of fifths, where it's two sharps. So let's group the chords in the key of D, if you can see that line. And we have D, E, F sharp, which is black, G, A, B, C sharp, which is black, D. So that is where, when we look at the chord map, the chord names in the chord map, that's why we get these increasing sharps as we go in a clockwise direction. You'll see that these sharps accumulate, just like you can see more clearly here, where these sharps or black keys accumulate going in a clockwise direction. And then likewise, if you go in a counterclockwise direction, like if we look at the key of F, just for good measure, I'm not going to like belabor this in every single key, but just so you can see it, let's go first to the chord map. And let's just go way over here. I'm going to go way over here into the key of E flat, for example. And we have, that's focused, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, and E flat. So just by the accidental labels or with the flats, we have 1, 2, 3, it looks like just those three are black keys or accidentals on the keyboard. And if we group these, so E flat, key of E flat, sure enough, we have E flat, which is black, F, G, A flat, which is black, B flat, which is black, C, D, and E. So we have those black keys. And again, ultimately, when we're looking at the chord map, we don't really care what's, as Michael Jackson said, it doesn't really matter if you're black or white. Like, that is kind of beside the point when you're looking at the symmetry of music and how all keys function in the same way. And the color wheel of each ring disregards the black and white. It's like, we've transcended the black and white. But it is interesting to see that that's the underlying pattern. Now, if we were to look at this just on its own, it's kind of interesting to see just removing the colors so they're not a distraction. You can see that it's, like I say, it's those tumblers when we're doing the heist at the bank. we've rotated the inner ring, so we've unlocked it, we've cracked the code, and we've come up with the pattern that really highlights the connections between chords in all keys and all modes. I'm working on lesson 19 right now, drafting out the lesson there, and it's all about the circle of fifths. And so there's so much more about the circle of fifths that I'm going to be diving into in terms of modes, modal mixture, borrowed chords, substitute chords, all of that. But just laying the foundation, getting the groundwork here in terms of the underlying inherent structure of the chord map and how to navigate it. So if we were to look at this a little more closely, you'll notice that the original just shows like the main name, the main root note name for each chord. So what do I mean by that? So look at this. We have, for example, F. F diminished is a white key, but its enharmonic name is E sharp. F and E sharp are sometimes, used depending on the context. And so we could say that this key should be black because of the E flat. And we could say that C or B sharp should be black as well. So if we went on just the enharmonic names for all of the chords, anywhere where there's a double sharp or a sharp or anything where there's an accidental, I filled that in as well. And you can see that actually a lot more of the circle of fifths fills in with black keys, or accidental names, I should say. They're not necessarily black keys on the keyboard, but they have those extra symbols to label the name. So this is getting at why certain names are used in the chord map. So let me show you what that means. Let's look at the chord map, and let's go to the key of C. And it's just a helpful place to get our bearings. And we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, or C, or to use the chord names, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, and C. Those are the 7 chords in the key of C that make up the key of C in that order. So just for good measure, C, D minor, E minor, F major, let's see, where am I? Oh, G major, A minor, B diminished, and then C. And then, because all keys work the same way, it's symmetrical for all 12 keys. Now, if we were to, let's rotate to a totally different key. Let's go way over here, because this is where, like I say, those black keys start to accumulate. We have the key of F sharp or G flat. So when we're going in a clockwise direction from B, B's fifth is F sharp. So we have B, F sharp. Sometimes the key of B goes by the key of C flat. B and C flat are enharmonic names for the same note. So if we look at B, B is right below C. And sometimes we call this C, sometimes we call this B, or sometimes we call this C flat because it's below C. So We sometimes call that C flat, G flat. So C flat's fifth is G flat, and so that's why they're, you know, fifths moving in that direction. But B is more common, so that's why it's larger than C flat, because C flat is kind of more of an, if not an anomaly, it's definitely not as common. So it gets a lower place, just like E. Like very rarely do you call this E flat, but if we're going to be calling this C flat, for example, C flat has a fourth, and its fourth is F flat. So keeping that there, labeled that way. Likewise, in the key of E, it has an increasing number of sharps. It has F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. So in the key of E, E's relative minor six, or its minor six chord is C sharp. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. So C sharp is bigger because it's the more common usage in this case, because E is more commonly used. Likewise, F flat, its relative minor six is D flat. And so if we're going to the trouble of labeling this as F flat, then it also has its relative minor D flat listed there. But at some point you have to kind of stop, because as you go further this way, you stop using flat keys, just like as you go further clockwise, you stop using sharp keys, because the sharps just accumulate so much and you start getting into the double sharps that it gets unwieldy and it's kind of like too much of a mouthful to describe. So let's walk through that a little bit. Let's go to the key of C sharp. C sharp has C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, C sharp. If we were to label it all with sharp names, then every single chord has an accidental in it. Every single chord has a sharp in the name. So it's like we're just kind of like I'm getting a little bit tongue-tied even saying it, because it's a lot of sharps. If, however, we called it D flat instead of C sharp, because C sharp and D flat are just two different names for the same note. If we called it D flat, instead we have D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C, and D flat. So just by, instead of using sharps, we used flats, we were able to shave off two of the accidentals. We called it F and C instead of E sharp and B sharp, respectively. And this is important, especially for guitar players. Guitar players tend to be guilty of just thinking in terms of sharps, because, you know, as you rise up the fretboard, you know, you think of, okay, this is E on the low E, and then F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C, and so on, because you're rising a half step, and sharp means up a half step, right? So let's just use sharps. So it might seem counterintuitive to use flats, especially for guitar players, because it's a sharp world. Especially like if you go to websites like Ultimate Guitar, where everything is in sharps, to the point where it's like you start getting into this territory where it's like, damn, that's too many sharps. You could have at least shaved off a couple of the sharps, thinking in terms of D flat. I'm going to get into in another video about the benefit of using flats beyond just saving your tongue from getting worn out. It has to do with the intervals used in modes, and how modes really are labeled and thought of in terms of flats instead of sharps. And it's all shown here within the circle of fifths. But that's what we're getting at with these different labels, is the more prominent name, the more prominent enharmonic name for a given chord is given prominence in terms of its size and position. So A flat could go by G sharp, but A flat, let's just do this one as one more example. So if we called it G sharp, the key of G sharp, it's G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F double sharp, G sharp, because just the regular G has an F sharp right there. So regular key of G has an F sharp. So G sharp has a double F sharp. So now it's just kind of getting ridiculous in terms of the accidentals. But instead, if we thought of it in terms of flats, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, G diminished, A flat. So in this case, we trimmed off 3 of the accidentals. We got rid of the E sharp, the B sharp, and the F double sharp. The F double sharp, like if you ever find yourself referring to a double sharp, you've gone too far. There's an enharmonic equivalent for that, starting with a flat, and it's much easier. So over here, you'll notice that, let's go back to the circle of fifths, starting on C at the top. Pardon me, I'm just getting my layers rotated to C. You can see that the sharp, sharp, sharps, you get more and more sharps going this direction. And going this direction, you get more and more flats, a lot of flats. The flats are in their prominent positions. They're the larger ones. And the sharps are kind of like it's also called sharp, but it's smaller because you probably aren't as likely to see it unless you're on like Ultimate Guitar or something like that, which mislabels chords all the time. So that is at least an overview of the chord names in the circle of fifths on this chord map and the logic behind how the labels appear on this. So it is geeky stuff, but super helpful and helpful to have your bearings as we get into all of the fun we're going to have with this going forward. So chord names in the circle of fifths, that's it in a nutshell. Are there any comments to jump into? Dave Mercer, hey, it's cool to see you on. So I Will Survive, great song, is based on the circle of fifths chords starting on A minor, D minor, G, C major 7, F major 7, B minor 7, and resolving on E sus, and E then starts all over again. Oh, that's really interesting. So here, let's look at that. Let's keep that up. Oh, hold on, let me go to the right image. So it's based on circle of fifths. So it starts on A minor. Interesting. So A minor, D minor, and then G. Yeah. So you can see if we had started A, D, G, like we'd just be going in that counterclockwise, through the colors. But we start on A minor, D minor, G, C major 7. That's cool. And then F major 7, and then B minor. So instead of B flat, we're coming up to the B minor, which is kind of keeping it within that key. And then an E sus. So it's an E sus up here, and then to E. So is it in A minor? Is that kind of the key that I'm? So. Is it B minor or B flat? Oh yeah, it would be. And then I Will Survive. That's such a great song. So yeah, that's really cool. I actually hadn't known that about that song, that it goes through, and that's why it sounds so great, because it's survived all these years as an earworm because it is using the circle of fifths. That's a great example. Thank you, Dave, for sharing that, because that's a good one. So the circle of fifths, it's super powerful. It is more than just a dusty old relic. It's not just a bunch of key signatures in a loop on a piece of parchment. We can dust that off and actually use it in this format as an actual tool to use rather than just for the GWiz file. Hopefully this was more than just the GWiz file, because it actually is laying the foundation for navigating this pattern, all of these patterns, in a lot of examples we're going to be going through in other videos. So that is, in essence, chord names on the chord map. Thank you for joining, and thank you for geeking out with me. And I will see you really soon, and have a great rest of your week. We'll talk soon.